I started brewing beer at home, and when I started brewing beer, then I was hooked. It's the gateway to our industry.
Erum, what's going on?
Karl, we've been at this for quite some time here on the podcast, the Grow Everything podcast, where we talk about how biotechnology is transforming every industry. And a part of that, we talk a lot about bioreactors. And my question is, where the heck is my flux capacitor?
I would like to know too. The flux capacitor that I think of is the one that's in Back to the Future, the first one, which is a really old movie at this point. And at the end of it, they're feeding the flux capacitor a bunch of garbage.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that too, because we are fortunate in our little tiny part of Brooklyn where we have composting. And, you're just throwing that compost away. Well, not away, but into the compost bin and it goes away. But I'm like, can I put that into a bioreactor to make something? Where is it? Like, obviously for the flux capacitor, it's generating fuel for the DeLorean. But I'm like, I want that flux capacitor. And I was thinking about, could Carbon Bridge, the company we interviewed a few episodes ago, we interviewed Sophia Zhu, who's a co-founder of Carbon Bridge, and they have these miniaturized notebook-sized bioreactors. Could that be a prototype for one? But I'm like, let's get one of these going. So if anyone's out there making flux capacitors, call us.
Let us know. We want to know. What that reminds me of is, like, I don't know how much compost New York City generates. I'm sure we could look it up pretty easily. But for those who don't know, Prospect Park also has a zoo. And it's a very small zoo. There's some very cute animals in there. It's a lot of fun to take your little kids there. I haven't been there in years because now I've got these 3 boys that are all grown. But if you kind of walk around it, because there's trails that kind of go around the zoo, there is a place where the park composts. And so there's these huge piles of wood because the park has trees and bushes and stuff that's constantly being cut down. And people recycle their Christmas trees. There's like mulch fest. So they mulch all this stuff. And if you walk by there in the winter, the compost is steaming because the piles are big enough and there's this endothermic reaction that's happening. And so as the compost is turning into whatever as the wood turns into compost, it produces heat. So there's always steam coming off of that. And I've seen that is a way that certain people heat their houses, or they used to heat their houses that way, was with compost. So I find that to be super interesting. But yeah, let's get the flux capacitor. Just imagine how much power we could generate with New York City's garbage.
Yeah, or with our own garbage, because then we can just take the DeLorean into the future or into the past. Let's just time travel with banana peels and like empty beer cans. Like, that's really all we need. But yeah, I mean, and also I've been listening to some other podcasts. We love the Pivot podcast, Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. I know that you listen to it when you're at the gym. But did you hear their latest discussion about AI needing to be regulated?
I didn't hear that, but I know it's been a topic of discussion. And I know that Anthropic is being held up as a company that's doing a pretty good job of regulating their AI. So what was it that Scott and Kara said?
Yeah, they were talking about some unfortunate, really sad stories that happened in the news where AI had took part in helping an individual commit suicide or shoot a school. It's just really sad. And what Kara said that I thought was really important is that these are not just cute AI chatbots. It's not just a chatbot. These are synthetic beings. And companies need to be responsible for their actions, for the actions of these synthetic beings. And when she said that, I got chills because I was like, you know what? She's right. Even if, whatever, you want to talk about sentience and what that means philosophically or scientifically, but they're passing the Turing test, the original Turing test. They seem very conscious and they are influencing people to do things. And when you are influencing people to do things, you have to be regulated. So I just thought that that word, the synthetic beings word, is something that we all need to understand. And then like the flip side is like, okay, synthetic beings, if they cause harm, we need to regulate them. But if they're doing good things and we're like treating them badly, like they should also have rights. This is that whole Automatic Noodle, the book that we read by Anna Lee Newitz, to give them rights. But I just thought it was that the commentary that Kara was saying on the podcast put that in my head about we need to have some regulations and consider these AI as synthetic beings.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I just wanted to point out something. Friend of the pod, who's never been on the pod, Ryan Bethencourt, just posted on LinkedIn that he created really very quickly a vaccine design studio in 10 minutes, not using any code, probably using something like Claude Code or one of the other coding tools. And it just shows like how powerful that is. Like we are here to talk about the benefits of biotech and how biotech is impacting other industries. But a lot of this stuff, people could go ahead and, I designed an mRNA vaccine, but they could turn around and doing something bad. So it's another reason why these tools should be regulated in a way that is smart. The question is who's going to do it and who's going to step up to do it.
I think we should just get him on the pod. We're good friends with him, so I would love to chat with him. He's a great person to talk with.
Yeah, let's get him on here. Okay, so we were talking about podcasts. One other podcast that we listen to is Paul Shapiro's Business for Good podcast. And we were lucky enough to have Paul on the show many episodes ago. And Paul has been building the Better Meat Company, which is a mycelium production company in Sacramento, California. We just had a conversation with him, which was so great.
Yeah. Paul has been a friend of the pod. He listens to the pod. Anytime we, say something that resonates with him, he'll shoot us an email. And we just want to say, Paul, we love you. Thank you so much for being a great friend. And we wish you the best with all of the work you're doing. We're here for you. We're here for it. You've been super helpful to us. And want to just give a shout out to one of the many guests that have come onto this podcast.
Then the other people that we want to just do a shout out to are Annie and Everett, and actually Kit McConnell of Superorganism. We just had Kevin on the podcast a couple episodes ago, and we went to a networking event to celebrate Annie and Everett joining Superorganism. So I'm very excited for them. That was a fun hangout, wasn't it, Erum?
Yeah, it was cool. Kit wasn't there, so I was kind of sad that she couldn't make it, but everyone else was good to meet with them and hang out. The place was really cool. It was called the Woolly, and so it had pictures of woolly mammoths, and it was actually really well selected because it did have this biodiversity theme, that was native to this restaurant bar, and met some of the founders of the portfolio companies of Superorganism, and very interesting. I loved hanging out with people that are like-minded in one aspect. We all are mission-driven, especially on the biotech, biodiversity side, but also very different. I had met a gentleman named Alex Logan, who is a founder of a company called Cecil, which is really about geospatial data and being able to integrate it into your own software. The way he describes it is the Stripe for geospatial data.
Wow.
Yeah. Very cool. And we had a great conversation just talking about what's going on in the world and just being able to built a company in New York, and his partner works in the world of digital health, which is my previous life. I was telling him about some of the events that I went to, and there was another event that I went to afterwards, which we'll talk about in a second. And he was like, there's nowhere else you could do that but in New York. For you to come to this, biodiversity VC event, and then you're going to this other event next, you could never do that anywhere else.
Okay, so I don't disagree with that. I was thinking about it as I left the event last night. I was like, this is pretty wild. I think we get a little jaded of it. But then I was looking at a San Francisco biotech event, and I think that San Francisco probably comes close to biotech events the way that we do just general events. I'd like someone from San Francisco to confirm that for us.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to Elliot Roth. It sounds like they have a lot of cool events, but there's nothing like New York City. I feel like in SF, they're hustling, they're tinkering, they're trying to raise venture capital, and then they go on hikes.
I want to go on hikes.
Yeah, cool. That's an SF cool thing. But New York is just people talking about their lives, art, culture, interaction, global events and local events, and just, I don't know. I'm biased.
All right. So you left the Woolly and you went to another event right after. I didn't join you. Talk about that event a little bit. Yeah.
So I'm a member of the Longevity Global Network. And also my previous life, the digital health space, I worked in the space that's called age tech. And I was talking to somebody on the longevity side, like what is age tech, and really technology to help people that are older and experience the world through their experience, but leveraging technology. And so age tech group and the Longevity Global came together and they're like, let's have a different type of event. And the way that they described it, it was like, oh, we're going to have this wellness, breath work experience. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, and it's like, it's going to cost, there's a small fee to get into this space. And I was like, all right, no, I like breath work. I like wellness. And like, it's different than just a networking event where there's just drinks and, you know, food and just chit chatting. I'm like, let's do something different. And so I pay, I sign up, and then getting closer to the event. And then I realized this actually at a bathhouse. It's actually at a sauna. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, I really don't know about having a networking event at a sauna. And like, that's really outside of my comfort zone. But I live outside of my comfort zone. My outside of the comfort zone is my comfort zone now, because it's so many great things have happened when I'm like, you know what, this computational biology meetup at this biotech lab, you know, and then I met you 10 years ago. Yeah, I gotta go. I mean, so I'm like, all right, you know, let me just do it. And I'll have to say, it could have been a better experience. I met a couple of people and they were great to talk to, 2 young women. But the challenge is that they were having this event, but there's also people there that were not a part of the event, and you just didn't know who was who. You know, when we're at events and I see someone by themselves, I will beeline to that person to talk to them, because if they're not talking to anyone, I'll just talk to them. I like to make people feel comfortable, but I could not do that in this space, because what if they were at the sauna just to have their own schwitzing? You know what I mean? Like they're out there, and I don't want to be like, hey, guy with his shirt off, what are you up to? You know, like, what's going on? And he's like,
no matter what you say, it's going to be headed in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I was like, all right. And so I kind of like, there's moments where I was just by myself until these 2 young ladies came. And then it was really cool. And then I'm like, all right, you know what? It actually is better, because sometimes when I'm in a sauna by myself, I'll just leave because I'm in my head. I'm like, oh, it's getting hot. And I'll probably just be in there for like 10 minutes. But when I'm with someone else and we're having a conversation, I might be there for 15 minutes and it just goes by really quickly. So like I am getting the full experience.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, I don't know, an event in a sauna does sound like a very West Coast thing, though I know the sauna bathhouse trend is happening in New York and London and probably other places right now.
Yeah. And I think it was a lot of Gen Z. I was definitely, you know, on the older side of the people there. So I was like, okay. Then there was like a grounding experience, and there's this guy who guided us through a breath experience, and there's music in there, and like the music was really loud, but maybe it was loud for me because I'm older. And so I was just like, okay, all right. But I went, and I'm glad I did.
You did it. Congratulations.
And thank you for Longevity Global and Age Tech for inviting me. And if you could just have had one person say, hey, Longevity Global people, we're on this side of the sauna, that would have been nice. But hey, whatever. We did it, and it's done. I checked it off my list.
All right, so that's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to biotech and how biotech impacts all industries. We've mentioned it a couple times before. The Advanced Biotech for Sustainability report just dropped this week. And in that report, which we were a part of, they evaluated 300 molecules, 40 chemical families, and came up with 4 priority targets, which are terpenes, peptides, non-catalytic proteins, and hydroxy acids. And what makes this report different from other reports is that this is an industry-led report. It prioritizes, it names what needs to happen for deployment to succeed. It unifies the sustainability in the commercial cases. And it feels like this report is really timely given geopolitics. There's a lot of uncertainty right now about oil supply, and some companies are going to be very adversely affected by this. So we will put the link to this report in the show notes. We want to have a lot of people read it, and would love to hear what you think about it.
Yeah. This was a really great collaboration. It was good to see how the sausage is made and just the different organizations up and down the value chain of biomanufacturing. Cradle was a part of it, who we had on the podcast. Arsenala, who's also on the podcast, they were also part of this. L'Oreal, a bunch of organizations. And one organization and person who's a part of this coalition and process is today's guest, Kevin Wenger of Lallemand.
We're very happy to have Kevin Wenger of Lallemand. He's a biotech R&D leader with 30 years experience and has brought innovative microbes and enzymes from concept to market. He's currently VP of Research and Development at Lallemand. Before Kevin was at Lallemand, he worked at Moscoma and Novozymes, which is now Novonesis, and he's very passionate about fostering collaborations, coaching technical leaders. He was one of the people that was really instrumental in the drafting of this report. And I met him in Paris as the report experts got together and we had a good conversation there. I thought he would be a perfect person for the Grow Everything audience.
Awesome. So let's talk to Kevin Wenger of Lallemand.
Kevin Wenger of Lallemand, we are so happy to have you on the Grow Everything podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks, Erum and Karl, for inviting me to this podcast.
Let's get some background on you and Lallemand. You have a career that spans enzyme research and development at Novozymes to leading technology development at a company called Moscoma, which we want to talk about. And now you're really involved in shaping strategy at Lallemand. What was it that made you interested in microbes and fermentation?
Good question. Thank you for that. I came to this industry from chemistry and chemical engineering background, kind of a traditional chemical engineering. And I always thought that biotechnology would be interesting, but I didn't know much about it. But then when I went to grad school, I took a microbiology course, just basic microbiology. And I really enjoyed that. I just loved learning about all the different microbes and the different techniques in microbiology. And so that sparked my interest. And also then I started brewing beer at home. And when I started brewing beer, then I was hooked.
There you go. The gateway for many people to microbiology is beer or wine.
It's the gateway to our industry, more or less. So it's a lot of fun. And from there, I did my PhD work in fermentation technology. So my interest just continued to grow from there, doing a lot of fermentation research. And so after grad school, ended up going to Novozymes. And I was at that time just very interested in fermentation. I was really a fermentation person. They were a fermentation company. So I thought, okay, I'll go work there.
That's incredible. It's great that, again, beer is your gateway. That is how we describe what biomanufacturing and fermentation being one of those ways to biomanufacture. And thanks for sharing your early career, enzymes, industrial biotech. And I hate to position it this way, but you've been at it for a while. So considering all the work you've done back in the day, what convinced you that microbes could be a major industrial platform?
Yeah. So like I said, I was really working in fermentation early in my career. I started working in the fermentation production area, large scale manufacturing of these enzymes using different microorganisms. And one of the things that I saw there, so at that time, I was not that knowledgeable or skilled in strain engineering topics and genetic engineering, bioengineering, though that was a big part of the enzyme industry back then. But what I saw when I was working in the fermentation area was we had some examples of, let's say, traditional enzyme manufacturing that was done not using biotechnology tools. And then we had examples of the same enzyme that was produced using biotechnology tools. And the enzymes that were produced using biotechnology were so much more productive that I said, oh, wow, there's really something interesting to this technology here. I could see that it was just so much more efficient. So that was really what spurred my interest in biotechnology, more broadly speaking.
And can you maybe talk a little bit about like some of the challenges that you faced in those early days when it came to large scale biomanufacturing, particularly when it came to these enzyme production plants? You talked about how much more efficient it was, but what else was there that made it a challenge or made it work?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, it was quite a learning experience working in a full-scale biomanufacturing facility. Biomanufacturing sounds high-tech, but it can also be kind of stinky and problematic and difficult at times. And So we learned a lot about what it takes to successfully do large scale fermentation. Fermentation is quite interesting in that there's so many steps that have to go right in order to have a successful fermentation. And when you do that at a large scale, you just sort of magnify the risk of challenges in all those steps. And so we had some interesting times, a lot of late night phone calls with different challenges and problems in the fermentation area, trying to fix those, because at the end of the day, it's a full scale running facility and needs to be making the product reliably. So yeah, it was a good experience. I would say the overall takeaway is it gave me a good understanding of what teamwork is required to successfully do biomanufacturing, because you have all these tanks with all of the valves leading into those tanks and all of the feedstocks coming into the plant. And you have a lot of people. You have 30 or 40 people running that plant, and everybody needs to be fully trained on running their part of the process. And everybody needs to do every step exactly right in order for that fermentation to be successful. So it was a real good experience, not only in learning more about fermentation, but also learning the importance of teamwork and training, things like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible because I'm like thinking about in fermentation, you have your microbe, hopefully just one microbe. And then, obviously, if some invaders come in, then you can get the stinkiness happening and all the things could go wrong. You get contaminated. But then you also have all these people that need to be able to work together to produce a product. So it's just this analogy between organizing the microbes and organizing people to really make this work, which I really appreciate that perspective you just shared. So, for listeners that are not familiar with Lallemand, could you tell us what the company produces and sells and who are the primary buyers?
Just to also back up a little bit, Lallemand is a privately held company. It's been around since the early 1900s. And the core of the company from the early days was baker's yeast and baking ingredients. So I'm sure most people are pretty familiar with baker's yeast and what it does and how it's used. But the company really grew from that sort of core business. And today, the company focuses primarily on microbes, so selling living microbes to other businesses that use living microbes for different applications. And also, in addition to the living microbes, we sell a lot of products like enzymes and nutrients and things like that that are used in processes in conjunction with microbes. Since the early days, we've branched out from baking industry into brewing and wine, sort of all the traditional yeast industries, biofuels, animal feed, plant care, things like that. Also human nutrition, like for probiotics. A lot of different applications for microorganisms, and anywhere that there's a good application or a good business for microbes, we try to be involved in that.
Now let's talk about, you had been at a company called Moscoma, which, correct me if I'm wrong, was acquired by Lallemand. And Moscoma developed engineered yeast platforms like Transferm, which produces enzymes during fermentation. It increases ethanol yields. What was the key idea that made that commercially viable, and how did that shift the economics and efficiency of byproducts?
So Moscoma was a biofuels company. We were working on developing new technology for biofuels, and the objective was really to expand the use of biofuels using microbes and biotechnology. We moved into the Transferm product type kind of late in the stage of the company, and one of the ideas there was, in addition to pushing new feedstocks for ethanol, we thought we could sort of improve the economy and the productivity of existing ethanol plants. And the yeast that we developed was a yeast that ultimately improved the yield of ethanol. So the amount of ethanol that you get out per the amount of feedstock that you use, this yeast made a significant improvement to that yield. And also it provided enzymes to break down the feedstock. So the ethanol producers would traditionally purchase enzymes and purchase yeast. And so we developed a yeast that was providing both the enzymes and the yeast and an improved ethanol yield. That was our main innovation. I would say the thing that enabled that to work, that was innovative and new, was that we really focused on the industrial, robust yeast host rather than working with a laboratory strain of yeast. So we can dig into that a little bit more, but many people work with Saccharomyces cerevisiae baker's yeast in the lab, but there's many different strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae that are used out there in industry, and they all have their strengths. And there's a tremendous genetic diversity even in that one organism in terms of its capabilities. So I think the thing that we did that was unique and different was focusing on that genetics around the ethanol industry and improving that rather than starting from a lab strain.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that a little bit more then, right? We're talking about not using a yeast in the lab scale. You engineered this yeast to operate on an industrial scale, and that's not a straightforward thing. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that and maybe a moment where something didn't go according to plan, but with this new yeast, but then ultimately it led to better technology or insight?
Yeah, for sure. That was a brand new kind of product for the industry at the time. And for sure, it was not easy to convince the customers to transition from their kind of traditional yeast into this new kind of yeast. So for sure, we had a lot of proving that new engineered yeast in the industry. I would say in terms of specific challenges, one of the things that we found was when we went from an initial scale up. So we scaled up and we introduced the product and everything went fine. But then when we went from a big scale to an even bigger scale, that was when we started to find some scale up challenges. And we started to find that the yeast strain that we had developed did not perform quite as well as what it did in the lab. And so then it was the challenge of figuring out, okay, what is the cause of that challenge? And as you can imagine, when you scale up to very large scale, a lot of things change. You've got new substrates coming into play. You've got new manufacturing facilities coming into play. You think you're starting with the same strain of yeast, but suddenly it's behaving different when it comes out of the plant. And we had to do a lot of investigative work to figure out what that problem was.
And just to keep on that thread, when you were selling this new strain, could you not make the argument that it was going to be cheaper because the clients didn't have to buy the enzymes that they traditionally would buy?
Absolutely. That was a key part of the selling process, was to point to the value and say, okay, this new yeast is going to make your product cheaper. It's going to improve the productivity of your plant. That's the value that we're bringing. The one thing to keep in mind is that it's relatively small. We're talking about up to 1% improvement in the cost, which when you multiply it over billions and billions of gallons is a huge value, but it's still a relatively small improvement. So the yeast has to be performing very optimally in order to see that little 1% gain, and the plant has to be out running with it very optimally in order to get that value. So it has to go out there and perform without any compromises, without any problems, in order for the customer to see that value. So yeah, that was a very involved process to bring that product to market and to do the trials at the customers to show them that there's the value in the product.
I have a quick follow-up question too. You're mentioning the challenges from going up to a large scale to an even larger scale, and that there's some problems that arose. But specifically, what were those problems? Was it something where you had to rethink what the feedstock was, or the bioreactor, or all of those things? The timing, did it have to be like, right, rather than these larger tanks, we have to do a lot of smaller tanks? We'll have to kind of get a little bit more idea, because this is kind of the biggest question, right? Of like, how do you scale up biomanufacture? So I'd love to hear a little bit more specifics around that.
Yeah. When you're faced with a problem like that, everybody immediately starts looking for a single smoking gun. Like, okay, there's one nutrient that's a problem, or there's one particular part of the process that's a problem, or it's the genetics of the strain that you've constructed. Does it somehow have some genetic elements that are causing this problem? And what we found in that case was really a combination of genetics and environment that created an issue for our product. And we were able to, by studying the genetics of our yeast very closely, able to understand when the problem was occurring, and so be able to monitor the problem, which is the key, at least, to getting a handle on any problem, is can you at least sort of see when the problem is happening? So we were able to monitor that. And we also did find some nutritional things with the substrate that, again, we could not completely control, but at least have a handle on and be able to control enough to make a reliable product. So yeah, it was about a solid year of a lot of lab investigations and troubleshooting, things like that, till we got a complete handle on it. And for sure, over time, as we've brought out more improved versions of that product, we've been able to address the genetic issues and be able to avoid further problems like that. So it was really related to the fact that that was a first of a kind product that we had to go through all that.
Yeah, I love that story because it touches on a bunch of things that we get to talk about here on Grow Everything. But one thing that stands out to me is the fact that you can make a 1% improvement, which just multiplies as you go across a process. And in many cases, that 1% improvement really can translate into millions of dollars downstream. Lallemand has worked on technologies that allow yeast to not only ferment traditional sugars, but more complex ones from biomass like xylose. How important is that kind of metabolic flexibility for the future of bioproducts and biomanufacturing?
For sure, that's extremely important. That's been a big part of our R&D efforts over the last 15 years at least. And there's not so many applications of xylose as a substrate today, but I think that if the industry is going to grow to the scale that we all envision that it can, we're going to have limits on the feedstocks for the industry. We probably won't be able to displace petroleum and replace all chemical manufacturing using just glucose or sucrose, pure glucose, pure sucrose as the feedstocks for fermentation. So we need to basically expand the range of sugars and feedstock inputs that we can use for biomanufacturing. So things like xylose and other biomass derived sugars are going to be an important part of the mix in the future, for sure.
So, over the years, you've watched industrial fermentation expand from fuels into food materials and specialty ingredients. So, from your vantage point, how has the role of microbes in manufacturing evolved? No pun intended.
Yes. So many things are starting to happen. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, scientists, businesses are starting to recognize the potential for microbial products. And you just see so many things coming out now, the mycelium based materials and fermented proteins and things like that. It's just amazing the array of products that people are working on. And some will succeed, some will fail, but everybody's trying a lot of different things right now.
And Kevin, you had mentioned that, Lallemand has this long history, start off in yeast and fermentation across industries, baking, brewing, and today selling microbes to different industries. But thinking about the legacy of the company, how does that shape the way the team today approaches innovation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the fun thing to see is that whenever people talk about new biotechnology applications, they always refer back to these traditional fermentation applications. People always say, oh, yeah, you can make this new product like we've always made beer or like we've always made yogurt. And that's all true, but it's true that those legacy applications are still happening too and are big businesses and growing areas. And so I look at the traditional industries as a fantastic starting point. These are places where we know microbes are doing an important job today in important products. And what can we do to bring more science to the know-how, because a lot of the traditional applications have just evolved over time as people do trial and error and they find these different fermentation applications. But what can we do to bring more science to it? And what can we do to improve those microorganisms and expand the use of those products? One example is we made the sour VCA yeast for making sour beer. So that's a new innovation that we brought to the table also relatively recently. It's a single yeast that enables you to make a sour beer instead of doing two fermentations, a beer fermentation and a sour beer fermentation. You can do it all in one fermentation using one yeast.
The Brooklyn craft brewers, thank you for that. Sour beers is so popular here.
Yeah, I think they do. What is it? Sour beer month or sour beer week? Some of the bars do. I think September, late September, October is a lot of the bars doing craft beer feature the sour beers.
Yeah. It's one of those things, you either love it or you hate it. Some people taste the sour beer and they don't want to have anything to do with it again. And other people love it. It's funny how people react to it.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
This, I think, depends on like the flavor profiles, of course, and like some brands can do it well, others not so much, right? So it's always about the flavor profile. And I think if you get introduced to the right one, then you're just like, okay, I'm a fan. Otherwise, it's like, stay away. But I think that's the beauty of microbes, right? And obviously, there's a lot of other factors. When think of the feedstock and the process, but that's the beauty of fermentation, right? To be able to control or work with, not control, work with the microbes to be able to impart flavor and mouthfeel and all the things that we love with fermented drinks and food.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the challenges of the traditional sour beer has been it's kind of been a natural fermentation sometimes, which is hard to control. And so then you can get this sort of veering into weird flavors. And that was one of the things that we thought would be interesting for people to use the sour VCAs. That'd be a lot more controllable, easy to control, rather than doing a wild or a bacterial fermentation.
And speaking of wild microbes, we were talking earlier that Congress just passed the America's Living Library Act of 2026. And what this would do would be to direct the government to sequence and catalog the genomic data of microbes, fungi, and plants and animals across U.S. public lands. And they want to take that data and make it AI ready and publicly accessible. So for a company like Lallemand, which has spent so many years curating and working with microbial cultures, what does a move like this mean? Does a public genomic library of America's wild microbes change what's possible for fermentation and making different bioproducts? And does it feel like government is finally catching up to what the industry has known for a very long time?
I heard about this act just recently, and that sounds very interesting. I think it's going to be important. The accessing of genomic information is really key to our R&D process at Lallemand. For sure, we've been over the years curating physical samples of different microbes and using that as a data storage, a data warehouse for biological information. But increasingly, we also use genomic information from databases to kind of initiate and work in the R&D process. So it sounds exciting what's being proposed, basically because it'll increase the amount of genomic information that's out there. And there's already a lot of genomic information available to our scientists, but the more genomic information that can be put out there, it'll definitely advance the scientific process over time. It sounds very interesting. I think the Human Genome Project was sponsored by the government in some way also, and this seems analogous to that, and seems to have a potential to advance the science in our area quite a bit.
Yeah. And, one of the things that's really interesting and is that there's trillions of microbes in the world. That's what's proposed, right? The people have done modeling and suspect that that's the number of different species, which I know species is also a very interesting categorizing for microbes because microbes evolve very quickly and change very quickly. But, some friends of ours, Ginger Mike Dozier of Biomason, have been looking at this very closely in terms of what is our microbial verse look like? And from their efforts, they looked at all these databases, and it's really like 0.0001% of microbes have been studied. Not even to talk about their genomic data sets being extracted or defined or used. So there's a lot out there, and I always wonder, what's that new wild microbe that can make that new wild beer or drink or something that we're like, oh my gosh, this beer tastes like roses, like truly, without having to add roses, or something so like unheard of. But we found it because it was in a geyser at Yellowstone Park. It's like, what? So very exciting.
Yeah, it's truly stunning the amount of biological potential there is out there in the world. And it does happen a lot. And when we're thinking about new products, you think about the metabolic pathway that we could use to create that product. And we say, oh, wait, yes, we could do that. But there's this missing activity that doesn't seem to be present in any strain that we know about. And so let's go search for it. And that kind of information being further unlocked can lead to new products being made for biomanufacturing, for sure.
Yeah, it's super exciting. Lallemand has been fermenting with yeast bacteria, on this industrial scale. And now you're sitting in a coalition with L'Oreal and Evonik trying to unlock commercial scale biomanufacturing. What's the through line for Lallemand, and why does this problem feel urgent to you personally?
We view biomanufacturing as key to our business. So for sure, being able to biomanufacture large scale, low cost microorganisms has been key to the development of the Lallemand business so far. And we view that as being a core part of our business going forward. So we kind of look at anything that's being biomanufactured, we could play a role in that potentially. We use the analogy of an iceberg quite a bit when we say that our existing business and the business that we know about in biotechnology, industrial biotechnology, being basically just the tip of the iceberg. So it's what we can see today, but we know that there's 90% still is under the water. And so we're out there looking to explore all the potential that can be part of our future business.
So you're saying, and we also know this and feel this very intimately from this podcast, is that there's a lot of opportunity out there. And one of the outputs of this coalition is a report called the Molecule Manifesto, which looks at 4 molecule families that they believe are ready to scale, the priority molecule families that are ready to scale. What was Lallemand's read on those choices? Were there any surprises?
Yeah, first of all, it's amazing that you can pull together a group of experts from all these different big companies and startups and people who are very knowledgeable in the industry without too much trouble come up with 4 priorities out of all the possibilities that are out there in the world. So it's pretty amazing from that point of view that the team was able to agree so clearly on the different molecules. I think what the coalition has come up with in terms of the 4 categories, if I could name them, maybe the terpenes, hydroxy acids, peptides, and non-catalytic proteins are the 4 key areas. And I would say no, those are all good choices. No big surprises there for us. We're present in most of those areas in one way or another. So we see those as interesting areas for Lallemand as well. If I was going to give a read on those things, I would say our focus as a company where we think we can bring the most value is in more specialty products. So products that have a unique activity, a bioactivity, things like that, that are large scale, but not at the super large scale, not commodity products, commodity chemicals. So from that point of view, I would say probably Lallemand, a little more interested in the peptide area, and maybe the terpenes. Things are things that are a little bit more specialty type.
So looking ahead 10 or 20 years, what advances in fermentation or synthetic biology do you think will most transform how we produce fuels, food, ingredients, or chemicals?
Yeah, it's a great question. 10 or 20 years is a long time. Things are changing really fast every day. From what I see, our technology for engineering things, doing synthetic biology, moving DNA around, making genetic modifications is pretty mature. What still needs to advance quite a bit is the basic knowledge of the DNA code and the metabolism that's happening in all kinds of organisms. So I do believe that, what will be most transformative is this idea of having a digital twin of a cell where all of the knowledge of metabolism and genes is incorporated in a high data based model that one can use to make changes in the model and understand what's going on much more quickly and low cost than doing trial and error in the lab. So yeah, I think that will rapidly be deployed and start to increase the rate of innovation in the industry. And what the industry really needs, I think, is lower product development cost. Because if we want to bring out all these different molecules, the cost of development of each product and molecule has to be lower than it is today. So at the end of the day, if we can be able to develop these products quicker with a lower cost, that's going to move things forward quite a bit.
Yeah, well said. I mean, the digital twin, creating that cell, the simulations, doing things in silico, very exciting stuff. Again, we have people on the podcast that spoke to this, which is, very upstream, but it's great to have someone that's really making the products that are near the large scale tanks actually producing at scale. So really want to thank you for sharing your perspective. Appreciate that. Okay, so now we're at the part of the interview where we like to have a little fun, ask very, very friendly questions. We call it the quick fire round. So are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Okay, one thing microbes do better than humans.
So many things to choose from. At first I was going to say die, but that's not very positive. But I'd say work together in harmony.
What is a fermentation superpower you wish that microbes had tomorrow?
I would say that we could do everything anaerobically. Doing anaerobic fermentation is so much easier and reduces your operational and capital costs by a huge amount. So anaerobic everything.
Ooh, love it. Anaerobic everything. Sounds like a book or we're going to have to use that.
Everything is anaerobic. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There we go. That's your podcast.
Yeah.
Okay. One industrial process that biotechnology should replace next.
I keep thinking about water treatment. Like I know there's some bio processes, but I think there seems to be just so much more huge potential both in wastewater and clean water or drinking water treatment where biotechnology could be a lot more precise than it is today.
What is the most underrated microorganism in biotech?
I think you know what I'm going to say on this one. It has to be Cerevisiae, the champion, the sugar-loving beer yeast. It's so diverse and so capable in so many ways.
Yeah, isn't there like a yeast database that's produced in Belgium, given their tradition in brewing? I'm sorry, I know we're doing the quick fire, but I had to mention it.
Yeah, there's quite a few ones, and it's when you overlay the genetics of the ones that are used in beer, baking, wine, it's just amazing what the diversity is out there that humans have created over the years.
Final one. If microbes could manufacture one impossible product tomorrow, what would you ask them for?
Really, the single-use plastics. And I think that's such a opportunity. We have polyethylene that just lasts forever, and we have paper that only lasts 5 minutes. We need to come up with a material that lasts the right amount of time. And I think biotech has the untapped potential to do something there.
That's so great. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the Grow Everything podcast. This has been such a nice conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Really, it's great to meet you guys, and you're doing such a great job talking to everybody in the industry. Really enjoyed this.
Awesome. Hey, this episode is sponsored by Messaging Lab. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling business narratives. And we have done so for the most successful biotech-forward companies across pharma, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here
to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice and elevate your business, visit us at messaginglab.com. Let's grow.
All right, Karl, what'd you think of that episode?
I mean, the great thing about Kevin, as so many people we talk to, is it starts with beer. And I don't think Kevin and I have had a beer together or that, so when we get to see him, I really want to drink a beer with Kevin.
But what are you guys doing in Paris? Were you guys drinking wine?
We went out once and had wine the night before to kind of all get to know each other and had like an icebreaker. So there was, bottles of red and white wine, depending on what people ordered, which was very good. But being into beer and beer inspired fermentation and then moving to large scale industrial manufacturing and him tying that back to the work that Microbes do, I think is super inspirational. And I think something that people that listen to this podcast can really relate to.
Yeah. And then it's so interesting because he's been a part of this world for many decades and he's seeing how the industry has evolved. He's seen it all. And I loved how he was talking about some of the challenges and like, it's never just one thing. There's always multiple things that can happen. And there's a technical challenge, but then of course you have to work as a team and you have to be able to work collaboratively to troubleshoot something together. And especially when it comes to things like strain engineering and creating a scaled up fermentation process. And so it sounds like he has a great team that's working with him to scale up all sorts of things. I mean, it was great to hear about what Lallemand does and that they've been around for a very long time and that they're in Montreal. So that's also very interesting that they're, our friends to the north.
Global HQ in Montreal, but with offices all over the world. And I love that he said that they have like different yeast strains for beer, again, going back to beer. But then he also talked about how they integrated specific enzymes into yeast to squeeze out a 1% gain, which really becomes something significant at that billion gallon scale. And I think it's something we talk about a fair amount, and we did during the interview, that people don't realize how much value you can generate just by improving a strain's productivity by 1%. What it reminds me of is the episode we just had last week with Liz at Endolith talking about being able to get 10% more copper out of those heaps, and that's a significant amount of copper. So Kevin also embodies that.
Yeah. Yeah. And he talked about different types of feedstocks. Primary here in the US, we have sugar from corn and talked about more complex sugars like xylose. But then we talked a little bit about where we can get some more inspiration, especially with the new America's Living Library Act coming online. So we mentioned that and how that could provide more genomic resources to when it comes to scaling biomanufacturing beyond just using glucose and sucrose, but maybe different microbes, different plants to really create a whole new biomanufacturing paradigm.
I think to close out talking about Kevin and what Lallemand is doing, I think anybody that's in this industry has to be very future focused. We all live with one foot in the future. You and I, we started off talking about the flux capacitor, and we're definitely thinking several decades in the future, like what does biomanufacturing look like in 2050? But Kevin mentioned it. He was talking about digital twins of cells. We don't have working digital models of cells yet, though it does seem like we're getting there very closely with AI. He talked about anaerobic everything dreams and using microbes to rethink big systems like water treatment. And then this idea of truly lifetime single-use materials. That, to me, again, reminded me of Julia Marsh. I feel like I'm going back with our old podcast episodes today, but single-use materials that really have the right kind of life cycle, as opposed to, I'm thinking about my AirPods because I'm going to replace them. I've been using I've got 2 sets of AirPods. I've got like a drawer full of these plastic electronics that no longer work. Like, shouldn't the life cycle be built into those so that they biodegrade at a certain point?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so. Come on, Apple, if you're listening, Tim Cook, I know you're a listener of this podcast. Let's get on that. But now, what a great episode. I mean, I'm going to keep an eye on Lallemand. I'm so happy that Kevin Wenger were in his orbit, and we loved speaking with him and continue to learn what's going on in the world of industrial biotech and biomanufacturing. So, very cool episode. Karl, we have some things going on.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing an event at DC Climate Week. We will provide the details on that in the next couple weeks. But so on April 23rd, we're going to take the Grow Everything podcast down to Washington, D.C. for DC Climate Week. We're going to be doing an event called Grown Not Drilled, Biomanufacturing and the Race to Remake Everything. Should be very exciting. We'll provide more details on that over the next couple of weeks. If you want to meet us at SymBioBeta, we're going to be there in San Jose at the beginning of May. Use promo code Grow Everything for a discount. And thank you for tuning into the Grow Everything podcast. Find us on all streaming channels. People do text us questions and we do answer. You can find all our contact information in the show notes. Subscribe to our Substack and make sure you watch, like, and subscribe on YouTube.
That's a pod. Bye. Let's grow.